Some weapons just don't go away when a war is over. They don't rest or just fade into the background. Instead, they lie in wait, poisoning the soil or hiding just beneath the surface, continuing their deadly work for generations to come.
Ecocide. That's a powerful word you're looking at right there. And it's not new. It was first used decades ago to describe a chemical weapon from the Vietnam War, a weapon whose devastating legacy is still unfolding right now in the hospitals and villages of Southeast Asia.
So that's really the heart of what we're getting into today. What happens when the fighting stops, but the weapons are still out there? We're going to take a look at these invisible enemies that haunt the peace long after the soldiers have gone home.
You have to understand, for millions of people in Southeast Asia, the official end of the Vietnam War back in the 70s, well, that was just the beginning of a whole new battle. A silent and in many ways a much more insidious one against what the conflict left behind.
So we're going to look at two sides of this coin, two parallel stories. Over in Vietnam, we're talking about a chemical legacy, something that literally seeped into the DNA of the people. And then right next door, in Cambodia, it's an explosive legacy that turned ordinary farmland into fields of hidden death. All right, let's start with our first invisible enemy, a chemical defoliant that was sprayed from the sky and ended up poisoning the very land for decades. So this stuff was called Agent Orange. On the surface, it was just a mix of two pretty common herbicides. But here's the catch. The real danger wasn't the weed killer itself. It was this highly toxic contaminant created when it was made, dioxin TCD, literally one of the nastiest carcinogens science has ever identified. And the sheer scale of this, it's just mind-boggling. Between 1962 and 1971, the U.S. military sprayed nearly 20 million gallons of Agent Orange and other chemicals all across Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. To give you a sense of what 20 million gallons looks like, that's enough to fill about 30 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The whole point of this operation, which was codenamed Operation Ranch Hand, was pretty straightforward. The idea was to strip away all the dense jungle that gave cover to Viet Cong guerrillas and, at the same time, destroy the crops that were feeding them. It was essentially a strategy of environmental warfare. They were trying to reshape the battlefield itself.
Okay, so now let's shift gears. We're going to talk about a different kind of hidden threat, one that lies silent in the soil, just waiting for one wrong step.
So while all that was happening from the air in Vietnam, its neighbor Cambodia was dealing with something else entirely. It's estimated that somewhere between 4 and 6 million landmines and other unexploded bombs are still scattered across the country today. And the really heartbreaking part? This wasn't mostly a foreign army doing this. During Cambodia's own brutal civil war, all the different factions laid these mines everywhere. And they kept no maps, no records of where they put them. They turned rice paddies, forests, even the ground around sacred temples into deadly traps that are still active right now. All right, so this is where it gets really real. We have to talk about the human cost, because this isn't just about history. This is about daily life and death decades after these wars officially ended. I mean, just look at these numbers. This is from one single year, 2013. Landmines killed or injured over 100 people. This kind of ongoing horror has left Cambodia with one of the highest rates of amputees per person in the entire world. It's a daily random threat for farmers, for kids, for everyone. And the cost of Agent Orange? It's just as brutal, but in a totally different, insidious way. That dioxin got into the water, the soil, the food chain, and it poisoned generations. It's linked to a horrifying list of cancers and skin diseases. But maybe the most heartbreaking part is the severe birth defects passed down through families, affecting kids born long after the war was over. The Vietnamese government figures as many as 3 million of its citizens are sick because of it. So this slide really sums it up, right? You've got two different weapons leading to the same tragic place. In Vietnam, it's a poisoned environment causing a massive multi-generational health crisis. In Cambodia, it's a paralyzed economy where people are terrified to even farm their own land, which just leads to endless cycles of poverty and injury. Both are legacies of war that just refuse to go away. But the story doesn't just end there with all this suffering. There's this massive ongoing fight to clean up these invisible battlefields and to try and find some kind of justice for the people who've been affected. Okay, this is really interesting. This chart shows a huge difference in how justice was served. On one side, you have American veterans who were exposed. They filed a class action lawsuit and actually won a $180 million settlement back in 1984. But on the other side, when Vietnamese victims filed a nearly identical lawsuit, it was just thrown out of court. The rationale was that the chemical companies couldn't be held responsible for how the US government decided to use their product. In Cambodia, healing is a physical job, and it is just painstakingly slow and dangerous. Demining is this incredibly careful, meticulous process. Teams have to survey the land, clear it literally inch by inch, and use every tool they've got, from metal detectors to the amazing noses of trained animals, to find and then manually disarm every single explosive before that land can be safely given back to a village. And speaking of tools, you are not going to believe this one. One of the most effective deminers isn't a machine, it's a rat. African giant pouched rats, nicknamed hero rats, are trained to sniff out the chemicals inside explosives. They're way too light to set off the mines, and in Cambodia, they have found hundreds and hundreds of them, saving countless lives. Back in Vietnam, there's finally some good news. After decades of a diplomatic standstill, the US and Vietnamese governments are actually working together on the cleanup. They're focusing on these hot spots, like the former Da Nang Air Base, where Agent Orange was stored in huge quantities. The process is incredibly complex. They actually have to heat massive amounts of soil to over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit to finally destroy that toxic dioxin. So all of this brings us back to one final, really heavy question. When you think about the Cambodian farmer who's afraid to plow his own field, or the Vietnamese child born with severe health problems decades after the last bomb fell, it's pretty clear the real cost of war isn't just paid by soldiers. It's paid by generations of civilians. So who's on the hook for cleaning this up? Who really pays that final price?